Wells was looking forward to a tranquil night at home. With her badge and gun safely tucked away, she strolled through the city streets, savoring a rare moment of normalcy. However, this sense of calm was abruptly shattered when Officer Greg Mathers, driven by a case of mistaken identity, accused Dana of being a robbery suspect. Despite her attempts to clarify her identity as a respected captain and law enforcement officer, Greg's biases led him to arrest her. The scene quickly escalated from a mundane grocery run to a poignant symbol of systemic failure and betrayal. What was supposed to be a quiet evening turned into a harrowing ordeal, exposing deep cracks within the very institution Dana had dedicated her life to reforming. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Captain Dana Wells had always commanded a room with an inherent authority that was impossible to ignore. From the very first day she donned her police uniform, she was acutely aware of the myriad challenges that awaited her. Being both a black woman and a police officer presented a unique set of trials, each demanding a different kind of resilience. Throughout her career, she had faced these obstacles with remarkable strength, unyielding determination, and a graceful demeanor that earned her respect from her peers. Dana's ascent through the ranks had been marked by her unwavering commitment to competence, grit, and intelligence. She had climbed the professional ladder not by leveraging political connections or maneuvering through office politics, but by proving her capabilities in the field. As a respected captain, she often took moments to reflect on her journey, marveling at the distance she had traveled from her humble beginnings. Today, however, Dana was not clad in her police uniform. She was simply Dana Wells, an off-duty officer savoring a rare evening of normalcy. The day was transitioning into dusk, and the sky outside was painted with a mesmerizing blend of purples and oranges. This time of day, when the city seemed to exhale and shift from the frenetic pace of daytime chaos to the calm of evening, was something Dana cherished deeply. She had spent the last hour in a grocery store, a seemingly mundane task that provided a much-needed escape from the relentless pressure of her job. The gentle hum of the store, combined with the quiet interactions between customers and cashiers, offered a soothing backdrop for her thoughts. Dana picked up a loaf of fresh sourdough bread from a local bakery, already envisioning the comforting dinner she had planned for later. Dressed in casual jeans and a simple gray sweatshirt, she moved through the aisles with a sense of ease and anonymity. Her badge and gun were tucked away in her purse, safely concealed beneath her arm. Even though her role as an officer never truly left her, moments like these, where she could blend into the crowd and enjoy a sense of normalcy, provided a comforting reprieve. After paying for her groceries, Dana made her way to the store's exit. The cool evening air greeted her as the automatic doors slid open, allowing her to step out onto the street. The scene outside was busy but manageable. Cyclists sped by with purpose, and a group of teenagers, animated and laughing, strolled past, their energy palpable. Dana couldn't help but smile at the simple joy that seemed to fill the evening. Slung over her shoulder was her grocery bag, and she began the short walk back to her apartment. As she walked, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Pulling it out, she saw a message from her partner, asking when she would be home. Dana quickly tapped out a reply. "On my way now, just grabbing groceries. See you in 10. Everything seemed routine, and nothing appeared to deviate from the ordinary. Meanwhile, just a couple of blocks away, Officer Greg Mathers was stationed in his squad car, feeling a sense of restlessness. The day had been largely uneventful, punctuated only by minor incidents, routine traffic stops, and a few noise complaints. Greg, who took pride in his ability to take decisive action, found the quietness of the day somewhat unsettling. He had joined the police force with aspirations of being at the heart of action, eager to make a difference. Though still relatively new to the job, his self-confidence often drove him to act on instinct. While his instincts were occasionally sharp, they were sometimes clouded by subconscious biases he wasn't fully aware of. As he sat in his car, the radio crackled to life, breaking the monotony of his shift. "Dispatch to all units. We have a 1031 in progress. Robbery suspect, black female, mid-30s, wearing dark jeans and a gray sweatshirt. Last seen heading west on 5th and Maple." The dispatcher's voice was steady yet carried an undertone of urgency. Greg's attention snapped to the radio, his adrenaline spiking as he absorbed the details. "Unit 34, copy that," he responded, his voice taut with anticipation. "Heading toward 5th and Maple now." His heart raced as he tightened his grip on the steering wheel. A robbery suspect fleeing the scene was exactly the kind of scenario he had been eager to encounter. With a sense of excitement, he made a sharp turn onto Maple, scanning the streets for anyone who matched the description. The thrill of potentially catching the suspect and playing the role of the hero surged through him, fueling his determination to act. Then he saw her. Dana Wells was meandering down the street, her pace unhurried as she carried a bag of groceries in one hand. Her strides were relaxed, each step conveying an ease of mind and a sense of normalcy. She seemed completely absorbed in her own world, unaware of the squad car that was slowly making its way towards her from behind. For Greg, this was the moment he had been waiting for. The description he had been given over the radio matched perfectly. A woman in her mid-30s, black, wearing a gray sweatshirt and dark jeans. There was no room for doubt in his mind. He had found his suspect. His heart began to race, a mixture of adrenaline and urgency surging through him. Without a second thought, he pulled the car over to the curb, keeping his gaze firmly fixed on Dana as she continued her oblivious stroll. The street was quiet, the buildings around them casting long shadows as the sun dipped lower in the sky. "Ma'am, stop right there." Greg's voice cut through the calm evening air with a commanding edge, reverberating off the surrounding structures. The abruptness of the command caused Dana to halt abruptly, her body frozen in place as confusion spread across her features. The words took a moment to penetrate her awareness. She turned slowly, squinting against the harsh glare of the police cruiser's headlights, which seemed to spotlight her with an intense and unwelcome scrutiny. Her first instinct was disbelief. There had to be some mistake. She hadn't done anything to warrant this level of attention. This had to be a misunderstanding. But the posture of the officer, the sharpness in his voice, it all suggested a gravity that went beyond a simple error. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. "Is there a problem, officer?" Dana asked, her voice calm and controlled, though a hint of anxiety threaded through her tone. Her experience in similar high-pressure scenarios, though not personally as the suspect, had taught her the importance of staying composed, of managing her voice and body language to diffuse potential conflicts. Greg, however, was not attuned to her attempts at de-escalation. His mind was already locked into a mode of heightened alertness. His pulse quickened, and his hand hovered near the grip of his holstered gun as he approached her. The description from dispatch seemed to be etched into his mind, and the scene before him appeared to match it with unsettling precision. "Hands where I can see them." Greg's voice cut through the air sharply, his tone laden with urgency and an underlying threat. Dana's confusion deepened, her frown deepening as she tried to understand the situation. She had dealt with tense situations before, but never had she been the focal point of suspicion. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she tried again, her voice steady but firm, striving to clarify her identity and intentions. But Greg's mind was already made up. His focus had narrowed to the procedures he believed necessary for what he perceived as a routine arrest. To him, this was a suspect attempting to evade capture, and his past experiences had conditioned him to expect deceit and falsehoods. "Yeah, right," Greg muttered dismissively, barely processing her words as his hand moved toward his handcuffs. Before Dana could react, before she could offer further clarification, Greg was upon her. He seized her arm with a force that took her by surprise, spinning her around and causing her purse to tumble to the ground. Groceries scattered across the sidewalk, their contents spilling out in a disordered mess. Greg's rough handling as he pulled her hands behind her back was jarring, the cold bite of the handcuffs clamping around her wrists sending a shockwave of anger and dismay through her. "Officer, this is a mistake." Dana's voice rose in frustration, her attempts to reason met with a stony indifference. "My badge is in my purse. I am Captain Dana Wells. You've got the wrong person." But Greg was already too entrenched in his own perception of the situation. His focus had become so narrowed that he could not entertain the possibility of an error. The concept of her being a law enforcement officer was lost in his preconceived notions. He had encountered many individuals who tried to deceive or mislead him, and now he saw echoes of those deceptive encounters in Dana's attempts to identify herself. "Yeah, right," he muttered again, dismissing her protests as he reached for his handcuffs. Before Dana could fully comprehend the gravity of what was happening, Greg was on her, his movements swift and unyielding. He grabbed her arm with a roughness that was startling, spinning her around and causing her purse to fall to the ground. Groceries tumbled out onto the sidewalk, their contents scattering in disarray. Greg's handling was brusque as he forced her hands behind her back, the cold metal of the handcuffs clamping around her wrists and sending a wave of shock and indignation through her. "Officer, this is a mistake." Dana's voice grew louder, tinged with frustration and desperation. "My badge is in my purse. I am Captain Dana Wells. You've got the wrong person." Greg's tunnel vision had fully taken hold. He was going through the motions of what he believed to be a standard arrest, adhering to the protocol he had been trained to follow. In his mind, there was no time for explanations or excuses. He was following the procedures he deemed necessary for what he perceived as a clear-cut case. His grip on her arm was firm as he led her toward the back of his squad car, ignoring the groceries strewn across the sidewalk and the rising anger in her voice. Dana's mind raced, her heart pounding with disbelief and frustration. How could an officer, someone who was supposed to uphold the law and respect fellow officers, be treating her with such disregard? Years of dedication, trust building, and professional camaraderie seemed to dissolve in this moment of injustice. In this encounter, her identity, her rank, and her years of service were rendered meaningless. As Greg pushed her into the back seat of his squad car, the world seemed to momentarily freeze around them. The street had begun to draw attention, with bystanders pulling out their phones to record the unfolding scene. To the onlookers, it appeared as yet another instance of a black woman being unfairly treated by a white officer. A scenario all too familiar and one that had sparked outrage and debate in recent years. Dana could feel the weight of their gaze, the sting of humiliation settling deep within her. This was no longer just a personal affront. It had become a symbol of a larger, more painful reality. Greg closed the door behind him with a finality that seemed almost symbolic. His mind, operating on autopilot, was convinced that he had completed his duty effectively, that he had apprehended a suspect and, by extension, that justice had been duly served. As he quickly grabbed his radio and relayed the message to the precinct, his voice carried a calm and self-assured tone that belied the gravity of the situation. "Suspect in custody," he said, his words clipped and precise. "I'm bringing her in now." As Greg navigated the cruiser away from the curb, the faint wail of distant sirens merged with the rhythm of his thoughts. In the back seat, Dana sat in silence, her hands cuffed behind her, each jostle of the car intensifying the suffocating weight of her predicament. She stared vacantly out of the window, where the city lights smeared into a kaleidoscope of color, each streak a reminder of the irony and cruelty of her fate. The blurring lights seemed to mock her, emphasizing how far she had fallen from her ideals. This moment was not merely a misstep. It was an excruciating confirmation of a systemic failure that she had spent years battling against. The very principles she had dedicated her life to upholding and reforming had betrayed her. The realization struck her with a painful clarity. The system she had once championed had become a mirror of its own failures, and now she was ensnared in its unforgiving grasp. What lay ahead was not just a personal disaster, but a profound upheaval of everything she had believed in. In the sterile confines of the holding cell, Dana's sense of disbelief grew more acute. The cold steel of the bench beneath her was a harsh contrast to the warmth of the indignation simmering within her. How had her life, marked by relentless dedication to the police force, culminated in this moment of utter humiliation? The harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights above cast a sterile glare, accentuating the grim, uninviting nature of the cell. The gray cinder block walls seemed to close in around her, amplifying the swirling maelstrom of her thoughts. Her hands, which had been shackled only moments ago, now rested heavily in her lap, the lingering ache from the restraints a physical echo of her emotional turmoil. She rubbed her sore wrists absent-mindedly, but her mind was far removed from her physical discomfort. Instead, her thoughts replayed the events from earlier in an endless loop, each replay more painful than the last. She recalled the moment Officer Greg Mathers had pulled her over, his dismissive attitude as he disregarded her words and identity. This was not merely about a mistaken identity. It was a profound betrayal. Captain Dana Wells, a woman who had fought tirelessly against systemic injustice, who had climbed through the ranks despite countless obstacles, now found herself reduced to a symbol of the very corruption she had endeavored to eradicate. Her authority, hard-earned through years of dedicated service, had been stripped away by the very system she had sworn to protect and improve. The holding area was mostly deserted, save for the occasional passing officers whose fleeting glances toward her were filled with a mix of confusion and perhaps a hint of pity. The air was thick with an awkward tension, an unspoken acknowledgement of the gravity of the situation that no one seemed quite ready to confront. Dana's heart raced, a steady drumbeat of anxiety and frustration, but she forced herself to remain outwardly calm. She knew that losing her composure now could undermine everything she had fought for. The anger that churned beneath her facade was a storm waiting to erupt, but she stifled it with each controlled breath. This was not the time for emotional outbursts. Instead, she needed to maintain her clarity and think strategically. Dana had always prided herself on being the pillar of control in moments of chaos, and she could not afford to deviate from that role, even as her dignity lay in tatters. The door to the precinct's intake room creaked open with a sound that seemed to amplify the weight of the moment. Sergeant Maria Lopez entered, her face etched with a mixture of concern and disbelief. Dana observed Lopez's reaction with a mixture of hope and despair as her eyes widened in recognition. For a fleeting moment, Lopez seemed immobilized, her hand hovering over the door handle as she grappled with the reality of the situation. "Captain Wells?" Lopez's voice broke the tense silence, soft and tinged with disbelief. "What in the world is going on here?" Dana rose slowly, her movements deliberate as she brushed off her sweatshirt. The action was more reflexive than necessary, a futile attempt to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. "You tell me, Sergeant," she replied, her voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge of frustration. "One of your officers arrested me. Officer Mathers apparently thought I fit the description of a robbery suspect." Lopez's face drained of color. She fumbled with the keys on her belt, her urgency palpable as she unlocked the door to the holding cell and stepped inside. I had no idea. This has to be a mistake." "It is a mistake," Dana said, her voice resolute but laden with suppressed anger. "But it's more than just a mistake, Maria. It's a catastrophic failure. A failure in judgment, a failure in training, and right now, it's turning this department into a laughingstock." Lopez bit her lip, her gaze darting anxiously toward the door, as if she hoped someone would arrive to fix the situation with a wave of a magic wand. "I'm so sorry, Captain. Let me get you out of here immediately, and I'll make sure this is addressed at once." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Dana didn't argue. She stepped out of the holding cell, her back straight, her face a mask of composure as they walked down the hallway toward her office. Dana's mind continued to whirl. The precinct was quieter than usual. The officers still at their desks seemed to sense that something was off, but no one said anything as they passed. They reached Dana's office, and Lopez quickly closed the door behind them, her face still flushed with embarrassment and discomfort. "Captain, I swear we had no idea it was you. Officer Mathers, I don't even think he knows yet. He's filing the report now." Dana raised an eyebrow, her gaze sharp. "He doesn't know yet after all this time?" Lopez swallowed hard. I don't think he recognized you, Captain. He thought he was following protocol. There was a description, a suspect, and he acted. It was only after you were brought in that anyone realized who you are." Dana sat behind her desk, her hands resting on the surface, though she resisted the urge to slam her fist against it. "He didn't even bother to listen when I told him who I was," she said, her voice colder now. "That's the problem, Maria. It's not just about mistaken identity. It's about the fact that he looked at me and saw a criminal. He saw a black woman in a sweatshirt and jeans and decided that was enough. Lopez winced, knowing the truth in those words. I'll make sure Officer Mathers is aware of the mistake, Captain. I'll get him in here to apologize immediately. Dana narrowed her eyes. This isn't about an apology, Sergeant. This is about a systemic issue. This is about bias, prejudice, things we've been trying to root out for years, and yet here we are. Lopez nodded, looking chastened. I understand, Captain. I'll start the internal review process. This will be investigated thoroughly. Dana sighed, leaning back in her chair. The exhaustion she had been holding at bay finally began to seep into her bones. Good. But this doesn't end with just an investigation, Maria. This needs to be a wake-up call for the entire department. What happened to me is just one example of a much larger problem. As Lopez nodded, her expression serious, the door to Dana's office swung open without warning. In stepped Officer Greg Mathers, his face pale, his eyes wide with confusion and horror. He had finally been told. Captain Wells, he stammered, his voice shaking slightly. I didn't know. I swear I didn't realize it was you. Dana turned her chair to face him fully, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she said nothing, simply letting the weight of the situation settle over him. She could see the fear and guilt written all over his face, and while part of her wanted to let him off easy, to chalk this up to a simple mistake, she knew that wasn't the right thing to do. Officer Mathers, she began, her voice calm but unyielding. You arrested me without even bothering to check my identification. I told you multiple times who I was, and you ignored me. You assumed that because I matched a vague description, I was guilty. Greg's eyes flickered with panic. Captain, I was just following the description from dispatch. You fit it perfectly, and I thought I was doing the right thing. Dana's jaw tightened. The right thing? She let out a slow breath, keeping her voice steady. The right thing would have been to take a moment and listen to me. The right thing would have been to ask for identification before slapping handcuffs on someone. But instead, you saw what you wanted to see. Greg's mouth opened and closed as if he was struggling to find the right words, but none came. His face flushed with shame, his hands twitching nervously at his sides. I'm sorry, Captain. I really am. I never meant to disrespect you. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I'm sure you didn't mean it that way, Dana said, her voice softening slightly, though the firmness remained. But your intentions don't change the reality of what happened. This issue extends beyond just my personal experience. Officer Mathers, this is fundamentally about how we, as police officers, engage with the very individuals we're sworn to protect. When I identified myself to you, stating clearly who I was, and you still failed to listen, it raises serious questions about how you handle civilians in the field. If you couldn't recognize me and acknowledge my authority, what does that imply about how you approach every person you interact with during your daily duties? Greg blinked, his initial defensive stance gradually shifting to one of deep contemplation. Dana's words were clearly penetrating, and he could now feel the full weight of his misjudgment. He had been so convinced he was in the right at the moment, but faced with the gravity of his error, he began to understand just how wrong he had been. Dana, however, did not relent. You didn't see a person. You saw a threat, she continued, her tone unwavering. And you reacted based on that assumption without taking a moment to question it. This isn't just a personal failing. It's a systemic issue that permeates our department and, frankly, the entire police force. Greg stood there in silence, his head lowered, unable to muster any further defense. His mind seemed devoid of any words that could alter the reality of the situation. Sensing the gravity of the moment, Sergeant Lopez stepped forward. Captain, I'll ensure that Officer Mathers undergoes a comprehensive review. I'll also recommend additional training for all our officers focused on racial bias and proper procedural conduct. Dana nodded in acknowledgement, but was already contemplating the broader implications. That's a start, but it's not enough. We need to move beyond mere training. We have to enforce accountability for these errors and truly commit to reform. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves facing these issues repeatedly. Greg nodded slowly, his face pale, clearly beginning to grasp the full extent of Dana's message. She leaned in, her gaze piercing. "Officer Mathers, I expect more from you. I expect more from all of us. Do you understand that?" He swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. "Yes, Captain, I understand." Dana dismissed him with a wave, and Greg exited the office quietly, visibly shaken. Sergeant Lopez remained, her posture tense and apologetic. "Captain, I genuinely regret that this happened. We'll address this thoroughly, I promise." Dana nodded, though the weight in her heart was palpable. "Make sure we do, Maria. Make sure we address this properly." As Dana left her office, the news of the incident spread through the precinct like wildfire. Whispers began circulating almost immediately. Officers who had been engrossed in their tasks, whether filing reports, handling paperwork, or engaging in casual conversations, abruptly halted their activities. Heads turned, and curious eyes followed Dana as she walked through the corridors. The atmosphere had shifted palpably, and it was clear that the incident, the arrest of Captain Dana Wells by one of her own officers, had become the focal point of conversation within the department. Dana felt the weight of the stares, but maintained her composure. She had faced public scrutiny before, but never like this. This was not the attention that accompanied accolades or successful high-profile cases. Instead, it was an unsettling blend of disbelief, pity, and idle gossip. They viewed her as both a victim and an anomaly, a high-ranking official caught in an egregious error. The fact that someone as respected and high-ranking as Captain Dana Wells had been wrongly detained by an officer under her command was not merely shocking. It was a scandal, and it was not likely to fade quickly. Dana walked with determination, her head held high, though beneath the surface, humiliation simmered. She was acutely aware that the fallout from the holding cell incident would ripple far beyond the precinct walls, bringing consequences that would extend into the broader public sphere. She could already hear the murmurs as she stepped into the bustling corridor. "Did you hear about it? Officer Mathers mistakenly arrested Captain Wells." "Wait, Captain Wells? Seriously? How does that even happen? Man, he's screwed. This is going to blow up. You think they'll fire him?" The voices buzzed with disbelief and speculation, and Dana tried to ignore them. Her focus was now on the broader implications of what had just happened. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Dana had always taken pride in her ability to maintain emotional control, to remain focused and rational even in the face of adversity. Yet now, the weight of the situation was almost physically oppressive, pressing down on her shoulders and making it difficult to breathe. The department she had devoted her life to was teetering on the edge of a precipice, and she knew she couldn't afford to let her personal feelings cloud her judgment. What had happened to her wasn't just an isolated incident. It was indicative of a much deeper, systemic problem that permeated not only her department but the entire law enforcement community. As she walked out of the precinct, the cool evening air hit her face like a splash of cold water, snapping her back to reality. The low hum of distant traffic was a strange counterpoint to the stillness that seemed to envelop her. She paused on the steps of the building, taking a moment to steady herself. The precinct, once a place where she felt at home and empowered to effect positive change, now seemed alien and distant, as though she no longer truly belonged there. Dana's phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her from her reverie. She pulled it out, her thumb swiping across the screen almost reflexively. A text from her partner appeared. "Are you okay?" Dana hadn't had the opportunity to explain what had happened in full, and she wasn't sure she was ready to. How could she articulate the profound humiliation of being detained by her own colleagues, of having her authority so suddenly and publicly undermined? She paused for a moment, struggling to find the right words. Finally, she typed a brief, vague reply. "I'm fine. I'll be home soon. Long day." After slipping her phone back into her pocket, Dana glanced down the street and noticed a small crowd gathered at the corner. Their faces were illuminated by the light from their phones, and some were holding their devices up, recording. It took her a few moments to realize what was happening. The crowd was focused on the precinct, and more specifically, on her. They were capturing images and video. no doubt already aware of the viral sensation her arrest had become. The realization that her arrest was now public knowledge struck her like a fresh wave of frustration. The incident had escalated beyond her control, its implications already spreading across the internet. The video, likely shaky and fragmented, would be the initial impression the public received. The narrative would be shaped not by the facts but by the perspectives and commentary of those who didn't know the full story, who didn't know her. The headlines were already forming in her mind. Black female police, captain wrongly arrested by white officer. It was a sensational, provocative story that played into existing narratives of racial bias in law enforcement. Dana understood that this was now a much larger issue than just her own personal ordeal. Her thoughts raced with concerns about how the department would respond. The chief had already left a voicemail, an uneasy mixture of apology and anxiety. "We'll handle this, Dana," he had said. "We can't let this get out of hand. Let's not make a big deal out of it. We need to present a united front." Dana wasn't so sure about that approach. Ignoring the incident or trying to downplay it would only perpetuate the problems she had fought against for so long. If she didn't take a stand, if she didn't demand accountability, what message would that send to her department and the community she served? The image of her being handcuffed on the street was now a public symbol of the very issues she had dedicated her career to combating. Unconscious bias, racial profiling, and systemic flaws in policing. Her phone vibrated again, a new message from the department's PR office. It was brief and blunt. "We need to discuss the press. Call me ASAP." Dana clenched her jaw, her frustration simmering beneath the surface. The press were bound to be all over this story, and the department would inevitably attempt to control the narrative, to spin it in a way that minimized the damage. She could already anticipate the carefully crafted statements about mistakes and unfortunate misunderstandings, language designed to smooth over the rough edges without addressing the core issues. Dana exhaled heavily, her breath visible in the crisp evening air. She knew there would be no easy resolution to this crisis. The protests were likely to follow soon, fueled by the video of her arrest. The outrage would come not just from those already skeptical of the police, but from people who had once placed their trust in the system and in her as a symbol of progress. Her rise through the ranks had been viewed as a sign of change, a beacon of hope for a better future within law enforcement. Now, this incident threatened to unravel all of that. As she made her way down the steps, she saw the reporters. They had gathered at the edge of the sidewalk, just beyond hastily erected barricades meant to keep the public at bay. Cameras flashed, and microphones were thrust forward as Dana approached. Questions were shouted at her in rapid succession. "Captain Wells, can you comment on your wrongful arrest? Do you think this was racially motivated? What does this incident say about the current state of the department?" Dana stopped in her tracks, her body tensing as she weighed her response. She had expected the media frenzy, but not quite this quickly. They were eager for a story, and this was a big one. She could see the headlines already forming, the clicks and views they would generate. It was tempting to address the cameras, to lay out the truth of what had happened. But she also knew that a single misstep could exacerbate the situation and lead to even greater complications. She felt a sharp tap on her shoulder, and she turned to see Sergeant Lopez hurrying toward her. Lopez's face was etched with worry, her eyes wide and her expression strained as though she was struggling to hold back a torrent of urgent thoughts. "Captain, we need to get you inside. This situation is escalating rapidly," Lopez said, her voice tinged with anxiety. Dana nodded curtly, her gaze lingering on the swarm of cameras and reporters that surrounded her, their flashing lights and persistent questions forming a chaotic backdrop. Reluctantly, she allowed Lopez to steer her towards the precinct's entrance. Despite their retreat, the press was relentless, their shouts and flashing cameras following Dana as she was guided back inside. The cacophony of voices was a harsh contrast to the relative calm of the precinct's interior. Once they were safely out of sight, Lopez spoke again, her tone considerably softer, betraying her concern. "Dana, I understand that what happened is deeply troubling, but the chief is trying to contain this before it spirals further out of control. He's aiming to maintain some semblance of order." Dana snorted, her frustration palpable. "Order? There hasn't been any real order here for years. This department has been a powder keg for too long, and we all know it. I'm not interested in preserving a false sense of order, Maria. I want to address the root of the problem and make things right. Lopez's expression was a mixture of concern and resignation as she shifted her gaze towards the door, as if hoping someone else might step in to defuse the situation. So, what exactly are you proposing? Dana's response was immediate and unwavering. I want accountability. I want a transparent, public acknowledgement of what went wrong, and I want Officer Mathers, along with anyone else involved, to face real, substantive consequences, not just a token reprimand. Lopez nodded slowly, though the anxiety in her eyes remained. I'll relay that to the chief, but you should know this won't be straightforward. There are higher-ups who will do everything they can to keep this from becoming a bigger issue than it already is. Dana squared her shoulders, her voice firm and resolute. It's already a major issue, Maria, and it's not going away. If the department won't confront the truth, then I will make sure it's brought to light, no matter the cost. With that declaration, she turned sharply and walked down the hallway, leaving Lopez standing in the corridor, grappling with the gravity of the situation. Meanwhile, Greg Matz sat in the locker room, his back pressed against the cold, unyielding metal of the lockers. His head was buried in his hands, and the usual hum of activity. Officers chatting, filing reports, answering phones, seemed distant and muffled, like an echo from another world. The noise around him was overshadowed by the deafening silence that roared in his mind. He replayed the events over and over, trying to piece together how everything had spiraled so catastrophically. In those critical moments on the street, his training had been his guide, and every instinct told him he was making the right call. The description had matched perfectly, a black female in a gray sweatshirt and dark jeans. It never occurred to him that the woman he had arrested could be anyone other than the suspect. How could he have missed such a fundamental error? How could he have failed so monumentally? The weight of his realization pressed down on him with increasing intensity each time he thought about it. He had arrested his own captain, someone with vastly more experience, someone whose leadership was not only respected but revered within the department. Dana Wells was not just any officer. She was a captain known for her integrity, her competence, and her unyielding commitment to reforming the department from within. Greg slowly lifted his head, staring down at his trembling hands. Whether the shakes were from adrenaline or sheer anxiety, he couldn't tell, but they persisted stubbornly. He felt a profound sickness, a crushing weight on his chest that made it difficult to breathe. The locker room, typically a space for camaraderie and post-shift relaxation, now felt stifling, as if the very air around him had become a hostile force. The door to the locker room swung open with a sharp clang, and Greg instinctively tensed, his gaze snapping towards the entrance. Sergeant Lopez entered, her face a mask of grim determination. Greg had seen that look before. Serious, no nonsense, the kind that heralded difficult conversations and bad news. "Mathers," Lopez said, her voice low and taut with tension. "We need to talk." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Greg swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat as he struggled to steady himself. He stood up, feeling a tremor in his legs that threatened to betray his nerves. The impending conversation loomed over him like a storm cloud, and although he wasn't sure he was ready to face it, he had no choice but to proceed. Lopez, her expression a mix of sternness and frustration, gestured for him to follow. He obeyed, his footsteps echoing faintly down the corridor as he trailed behind her, his heart thundering in his chest with every step. The hallway seemed unusually long today, stretching out in front of him as if it were mocking his sense of dread. As they walked, they passed the bullpen, a hive of activity where officers were hunched over desks, buried in paperwork and fielding phone calls. Their chatter and the hum of ringing phones created a background noise that only intensified Greg's unease. A few officers glanced up as he walked by, their eyes flickering with curiosity or judgment, but no one spoke. The silence that followed their gazes felt like a crushing weight, more oppressive than any verbal condemnation. Greg couldn't shake the feeling that the entire precinct was already aware of the incident. His blunder had quickly become the centerpiece of office gossip, a story that spread faster than he could have imagined. Lopez guided him to a small, nondescript conference room. The door clicked shut behind them with a finality that sent a shiver down Greg's spine. Inside, the room was sparsely furnished, just a plain table surrounded by a few unremarkable chairs. Despite its simplicity, the atmosphere inside was dense with tension, almost as if the walls were inching closer, suffocating him. Greg lowered himself into one of the chairs, his hands resting nervously on his knees, while his mind whirled with a storm of conflicting thoughts and emotions. Lopez remained standing, her posture rigid with an air of authority. Her arms were crossed, and her eyes locked onto him with a piercing intensity. For a moment, the room was steeped in silence, the kind that seemed to stretch on forever and amplify every heartbeat. The weight of the unspoken words hung heavily in the air, making the quiet almost unbearable. Eventually, Lopez broke the silence, her voice carrying a calmness that barely masked her frustration. "Do you have any idea how catastrophic this looks?" she asked, her eyes narrowing with an edge of disappointment. Greg's throat was dry, and he struggled to find his voice, each word feeling like it was being dragged out of him. I know, Sergeant. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Lopez exhaled sharply, her shoulders relaxing slightly as her hands dropped to her sides. "Whether you meant for it to happen or not doesn't change the reality of the situation. You arrested Captain Wells, one of our own, a captain, for God's sake. Greg, do you grasp the gravity of this?" Greg nodded, though the gesture felt mechanical and insincere. "I thought I was following protocol. The description matched. I believed I had the right suspect." Lopez's voice took on a sharper edge, disbelief evident in her tone. "Is that all it takes? A vague description, and you immediately jump to the conclusion of guilt? You didn't even bother to check her identification, did you?" Greg's face flushed with embarrassment and shame. "No, I didn't. I thought she was just trying to, I don't know, talk her way out of it. I've seen people do that before." Lopez's gaze was unyielding, her expression hardening as she scrutinized him. "Talk her way out of it? She told you she was Captain Wells. You didn't listen. You didn't even entertain the possibility that she might have been telling the truth." Greg's gaze fell to the table, his eyes unable to meet hers. His mind spun with a whirlwind of regret and self-recrimination, and he felt utterly powerless to undo the damage he had caused. There was no way to go back, no way to erase the arrest, no way to remove the stain of humiliation from both himself and Captain Wells. Lopez pulled out a chair and sat down directly across from him, leaning forward slightly. "Greg, this isn't merely about making a mistake. It's about the fact that you saw a black woman in a sweatshirt and immediately assumed she was guilty. You didn't question it. You didn't hesitate. You acted purely on instinct, and your instincts were tragically wrong." Greg winced at her words, his sense of self-worth crumbling under the weight of her criticism. He had always prided himself on his integrity and adherence to the law, on being a cop who did the right thing. But now, he was being forced to confront a painful truth. His instincts, his judgment, had been tainted by biases he was reluctant to acknowledge. "I didn't mean to," he began, but Lopez cut him off before he could finish. "I understand you didn't intend for things to turn out this way, Greg, but that's exactly where the issue lies. It's not about your intentions. It's about the tangible impact of your actions, and that impact is monumental. Captain Wells is one of the most esteemed officers in our department. Yet, you handled her as if she were a criminal. Do you realize the kind of message that sends?" Greg shook his head, the gravity of her words settling heavily on his shoulders. "I didn't think," he murmured, trailing off as he struggled to find the right words. "No, you didn't," Lopez interjected sharply, her voice unwavering. "And now we're all going to be dealing with the fallout." The word fallout hit Greg like a punch to the gut. He knew she was right. This situation had escalated far beyond his own misjudgment. His actions had ripple effects throughout the entire department, and the consequences were just beginning to unfold. Lopez sighed deeply, leaning back in her chair with a weary expression. The video of the arrest is already all over social media. It's gone viral. Protests are forming outside the precinct as we speak. People are angry, and they have every right to be. This isn't just a public relations disaster, Greg. This is a full-blown crisis. Greg's heart sank even further at her words. He had anticipated that the video would eventually surface. There were plenty of bystanders recording the incident, but he hadn't grasped the sheer speed at which it would spread. The thought of millions of people scrutinizing the footage, witnessing his error in real time, was almost unbearable. "What's going to happen now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lopez studied him for a long, hard moment before responding. "The chief is in a meeting with the mayor. They're trying to figure out a strategy for damage control, but the outlook isn't promising. There's talk of you being suspended or even terminated." The blood drained from Greg's face at the mention of termination. The idea hadn't even crossed his mind until now, but it seemed inevitable. This wasn't a simple mistake that could be easily repaired. He had arrested a captain, his own superior, and now the department was scrambling to manage the crisis. Lopez's gaze softened slightly as she observed him. "Look, Greg, I know this wasn't your intention, but this has grown beyond you. The department is going to have to make a public statement, and they need to demonstrate that they're taking this seriously. That means there will be consequences, whether you like it or not." Greg nodded slowly, though his mind was still reeling from the potential loss of his job. He had worked tirelessly to get where he was, investing countless hours and effort into his career. And now, because of one critical lapse in judgment, it could all be in jeopardy. "I understand," he said quietly, though the words felt hollow and inadequate. Lopez stood up, the chair scraping against the floor with a loud sound. "For what it's worth, Greg, I don't think you're a bad cop. But you need to start considering the broader implications of your actions. There's much more at stake than simply catching suspects. You need to be mindful of how your actions affect others and how they reflect on the department. If you can't grasp that, then maybe this isn't the right place for you." Her words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding, and Greg felt them cut through him like a blade. He had always prided himself on being a model cop, dedicated, reliable, unwavering. But now, for the first time, he was forced to grapple with a disquieting possibility. Maybe he wasn't as good as he'd always believed. Maybe his instincts weren't as infallible as he had assumed. Perhaps he had more to learn, more to atone for. Lopez's departure left Greg alone in the stark, unwelcoming room, his mind churning with a tumult of emotions: guilt, shame, fear, and confusion. The enormity of the situation weighed heavily on him, a burden so great that he wasn't sure if he'd ever escape its grasp. As the minutes dragged on, Greg's thoughts swirled around Lopez's words, the angry protests outside, and the viral video that was now spreading like wildfire online. His actions had ignited a controversy, a firestorm of public outrage that seemed impossible to quell. The realization that his future was slipping through his fingers, beyond his control, gnawed at him relentlessly. Slowly, he rose from his chair, his legs unsteady and weak beneath him, and made his way out of the conference room. The familiar precinct hallways now felt alien, their usual comfort replaced by a sense of estrangement, as though he was wandering through a life that was no longer his own. As he walked down the corridor, Greg passed several officers whose glances held a mixture of sympathy and judgment. No one spoke, but the silence was deafening, filled with unspoken words and unasked questions. He stepped outside, greeted by the cool evening air that felt oddly refreshing against his troubled mind. The sounds of the protests grew louder, their intensity rising with every step he took. He stood on the steps of the precinct, his gaze fixed on the crowd that had gathered below. Their chants reverberated through the air. "Justice for Captain Wells. No more police brutality. Hold them accountable." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 5 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Greg's heart pounded in his chest, a stark contrast to the calm exterior he had always maintained. For the first time, he found himself on the other side of the equation. He had always been the one inside the precinct, the one with the badge, the one whom people relied upon for protection. But now, he felt like an outsider, a figure of scorn rather than authority. His future, his career, his reputation, all seemed uncertain, slipping away like sand through his fingers. Standing there on the steps, amidst the growing uproar, Greg Mathers came to a stark realization of just how deep and pervasive the problem was. Meanwhile, Dana Wells sat in her office, the door firmly shut against the clamor of the precinct outside. The dim glow of her desk lamp cast long, somber shadows across the walls, giving the small room an almost surreal, oppressive feel. She had been sitting at her desk for what seemed like hours, but her focus was fractured. A blank report lay in front of her, the cursor on her computer screen blinking steadily, a reminder of her uncompleted work. Yet, her thoughts were miles away, tangled in the events of the past 24 hours. The adrenaline from the arrest had dissipated, leaving in its wake a profound emotional exhaustion that Dana rarely allowed herself to experience. Her body ached from the tension she had been holding since Officer Greg Mathers had cuffed her on that street corner. The humiliation, which she had managed to suppress earlier, now lingered like a bitter aftertaste, refusing to fade. No matter how many times she replayed the scene in her mind, she couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of betrayal. Dana had spent her entire career striving to earn the respect and trust of her peers. As a black woman in law enforcement, she had always been aware that she needed to be twice as good, twice as resilient, to be seen as an equal. Her journey from patrol officer to detective, from detective to sergeant, and eventually to captain was a testament to her dedication and perseverance. Despite all her accomplishments and the positive changes she had worked hard to implement, diversity training, policies against racial profiling, and community policing initiatives, one of her own officers had arrested her without acknowledging her position, her authority, or his own biases. Dana clenched her jaw, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, as she reflected on the precinct, a place she had once considered her second home. She had invested so much of herself into this institution, hoping to make a meaningful difference from within. She had confronted systemic issues, pushed for reforms, and advocated for the community she served. Yet, now, she found herself handcuffed, reduced to the very status she had fought against for so long. Her phone buzzed on the desk, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw a text from her partner, Emma. "How are you holding up? Everyone's talking about it at the station. Call me if you need to talk." Dana sighed deeply. Emma, a firefighter at a station across town, worked in a very different environment, one that was more like a close-knit family compared to the often harsh and politically charged atmosphere of a police department. Dana sometimes envied that sense of camaraderie, though she would never openly admit it. She wanted to respond to Emma, to reassure her that she was okay, that everything would blow over soon. But the truth was, Dana wasn't sure if she was fine. The situation felt too complex, too significant to dismiss with a simple reply. She wasn't sure if this was something she could just push aside, or if it would continue to linger, reshaping her future and her place within the department. A knock on the door punctuated the heavy silence in the room. "Come in," Dana called out, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions she was trying to suppress. She straightened in her chair, her posture rigid as she prepared herself for the meeting. The door creaked open, and Chief Henry Marshall walked in. Marshall was a formidable figure, tall and broad-shouldered, his presence commanding attention. His once black hair was now streaked with distinguished gray, and his uniform was pristine, with the gold stars on his collar gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Dana had always held a deep respect for him, despite their occasional clashes over policy. He was old school in many respects, yet he had supported her efforts toward reform, a gesture she deeply valued. However, today there was a distinct gravity in his demeanor, a sense of foreboding that was hard to ignore. "Dana," he began, his voice carrying a somber tone, "we need to talk." He gestured towards the chair opposite her desk, and Dana nodded, motioning for him to sit. Chief Marshall closed the door behind him and took his seat, the tension in the room palpable. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the air charged with an unspoken weight that seemed to press down on them both. Marshall broke the silence, his gaze steady yet burdened. "I'm sure you're aware of why I'm here." Dana gave a slow nod, acknowledging the unspoken understanding between them. "I figured," she replied quietly. The chief leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, a sign of his deep concern. "Dana, you know I hold you in high regard. I've watched you progress through the ranks and witnessed the positive changes you've brought to this department. But what happened yesterday, well, it's caused a lot of problems." Dana's stomach tightened at his words, but she maintained a calm exterior. "I'm aware." Marshall sighed deeply, rubbing the back of his neck as if trying to ease a lingering strain. "The protests outside are still going strong. They're not showing any signs of diminishing. The media is relentless, and the mayor is, to put it mildly, displeased. He's concerned about the impact this is having on public trust in the department." The term, public trust, grated on Dana's nerves. It was a bitter irony to her. The erosion of public trust had been a long-standing issue, far predating this incident. It wasn't merely the result of one officer's mistake, but rather a symptom of deeper, systemic problems that had been ignored for too long. "This isn't just about one mistake," Dana said, keeping her voice controlled and firm. "What happened yesterday is part of a much larger issue, one we've been reluctant to confront." Marshall's eyes sharpened, and for a fleeting moment, Dana saw the weight of decades of service in his gaze. He had weathered numerous scandals and corruption over the years, but this was different. This wasn't merely a public relations disaster. It threatened the very integrity of the department itself. "I know," Marshall said quietly, his voice heavy with resignation. "Do you think I don't see it? Do you think I haven't been trying to address it? The truth is, Dana, the department is like a machine. Machines don't change overnight. We've been patching up leaks for years, but every time we fix one, another springs up. It's a relentless struggle." Dana leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of her desk. "I understand that, Chief, but we can't keep treating this as just another problem to manage. We can't sweep it under the rug and hope it disappears. We need to confront this head-on." Marshall's expression hardened, and he nodded. "I'm not suggesting we ignore it. We need to be strategic about our approach. The mayor is already discussing an independent investigation into the incident, and I won't sugarcoat it. Officer Mathers might well lose his job over this." The weight of his words settled heavily between them. Dana knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she also knew that confronting these issues head-on was the only way to begin rebuilding the trust and integrity that had been so deeply fractured. Dana's stomach twisted in a tight knot as she absorbed the gravity of the chief's words. She had braced herself for the fallout from Greg Mathers' mistake, but the weight of the situation was proving to be more complex than she had anticipated. Mathers' error had not only tarnished her reputation but had also highlighted deep-seated flaws within the department's culture. The question that gnawed at her now was whether firing Mathers would genuinely address the root of the problem, or if it was merely a convenient way for the department to deflect scrutiny and distance itself from its shortcomings. "This isn't just about Mathers," Dana said, her voice low but resolute. "It's about how we train our officers and, more critically, how we confront and address bias within our ranks. Simply firing him won't resolve these underlying issues." Marshall regarded her thoughtfully, his nod slow and contemplative. "You're right, but we also have to take decisive action to demonstrate to the public that we're taking this matter seriously. If we don't, our credibility will be irreparably damaged." Dana's gaze dropped to her desk, her thoughts racing. She wanted genuine accountability, but not just for Greg Mathers. Her vision extended beyond individual cases to systemic reform. Changes that would tackle the deep-rooted issues responsible for incidents like this one. Yet, she knew all too well how the department functioned. The higher-ups were more concerned with managing public perception than with making substantial, lasting improvements. The mayor would demand a swift resolution, something to quell the public outcry and make the protests subside. Dana, however, wasn't interested in superficial fixes. "What about the reforms I've been advocating?" Dana pressed, her voice steady despite her frustration. "The bias training and the revised arrest protocols? We've been discussing these changes for months, yet they keep getting postponed." Marshall sighed heavily, reclining in his chair with a look of resignation. "I understand your frustration, and I agree that these reforms are necessary. But the department's resources are already stretched thin. Implementing new training programs requires time, money, and manpower. Right now, we're under intense pressure from the top to manage this crisis, and that's where our focus is. Dana's hands tightened into fists beneath her desk. The same excuses, the same bureaucratic obstacles. She had heard them for years, and she was exhausted by the endless delays. The department could find funds for new equipment, tactical gear, and public relations campaigns, but when it came to addressing fundamental issues, bias, inequality, accountability, there was always some roadblock, some reason why progress couldn't be made. "I'm not asking for miracles," Dana said, her voice sharp with frustration, "but we need to start somewhere. If we don't, what happened to me will continue to happen to others, civilians who lack the rank or the platform to speak out." Marshall's eyes softened slightly, and for the first time, Dana noticed a glimmer of empathy in his gaze. "I hear you, Dana. I do. And I will support you in pushing for these reforms. But you have to be prepared for resistance, not just from the higher-ups, but from within the department itself. Many people are unwilling to acknowledge that we have a problem." "I'm not afraid of resistance," Dana replied, her voice firm and unwavering. "I'm afraid of inaction." Marshall nodded solemnly, his expression reflecting the seriousness of the situation. "All right, let's take this step by step. The mayor's office is likely to release a statement soon, announcing an independent investigation. That should give us some breathing room, but we need to be proactive. I want you to draft a proposal for the reforms you've been advocating. We'll push it through, but we'll need to be strategic and prepared for the challenges ahead." Dana met his gaze with a renewed sense of determination. "I'll get on it, but we need to act swiftly and decisively. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to bring about meaningful change." Dana felt a small glimmer of hope, though she was acutely aware of how slow and arduous the process would likely be. Nonetheless, it was a start, and that was something. "I'll have the proposal ready by the end of the week," Dana said, her voice firm and determined. "Good," Marshall replied, his expression still serious, but noticeably less guarded than before. He stood up, his posture a blend of authority and genuine concern. "And Dana, take care of yourself. This isn't going to be easy, and there's going to be a lot of scrutiny on you. But you're one of the best officers we have, and I don't want to lose you." Dana looked up at him, her eyes steely but filled with gratitude. "I'm not going anywhere, Chief. Not until we get this right." Marshall gave her a small nod of approval before turning and leaving the office, closing the door softly behind him. As soon as he was gone, Dana let out a long breath, leaning back in her chair. The weight of the conversation, the situation, and everything that had transpired pressed down on her. Despite the crushing burden, she refused to let it overwhelm her. She had come too far and fought too hard to back down now. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 6 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Dana picked it up, swiping the screen to read Emma's message once more. The thought of calling Emma, hearing her supportive voice, and seeking comfort in the midst of this chaos was tempting. But Dana hesitated. She knew that, while Emma had always been a pillar of support, this was something she needed to face on her own, at least for the moment. She typed out a quick response, "I'm okay, just a lot going on. I'll see you later tonight." Setting the phone down, Dana stared at the blank report on her computer screen. There was so much to do, so many details to address, but she had to remain focused. The reforms she had been advocating for were now more crucial than ever, and she couldn't afford to lose sight of that. Dana began typing, the rhythmic clacking of the keyboard filling the silence of her office. Outside, the protest continued to swell, the voices of the crowd growing louder and more insistent. They were demanding change and justice, and Dana knew she had to be an integral part of that movement. She had to leverage her position and influence to push for meaningful reforms. Reforms that would ensure what happened to her would never be repeated. She worked late into the night, her resolve burning bright and keeping her focused. The events of the past day had shaken her deeply, but they had also ignited a fierce determination within her. Dana was not going to let that fire die out until the job was done. until the department she had dedicated her life to was finally one she could be proud of. And if that meant fighting every step of the way, then so be it. Dana Wells was not one to back down from a challenge. Not now, not ever. The next day, Dana sat at the press conference table, her back straight and her hands clasped tightly together on the surface before her. The room was packed with reporters, their faces a blend of curiosity and resolve, each eager to capture the unfolding story. Cameras flashed intermittently, their bright lights slicing through the dimness of the large conference room. The air was thick with tension, the anticipation palpable as it hummed through the gathered crowd. To Dana's right sat Chief Marshal, his face a stern mask of authority, though Dana could discern the exhaustion in his eyes. To her left was the mayor, a man more concerned with political survival than with genuine justice, his expression carefully neutral. Other senior officials and department heads flanked them on either side, forming a united front intended to project stability and control amidst the brewing storm. The protest outside the precinct had grown in both size and intensity, with hundreds of people now gathered. Their voices rose in unison, demanding accountability and change. The chants faintly echoed through the walls of the building, a constant reminder that this press conference was not just a routine briefing. It was a moment of reckoning for the entire police department. Dana felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was her opportunity to speak, to address what had happened, and to advocate for the changes she knew were desperately needed. But she was also acutely aware of the high stakes. One wrong word or misstep could send the situation spiraling further out of control. The department's reputation, her career, and the trust of the community were all on the line. The mayor was the first to speak, his voice calm and measured, the practiced tone of a politician who had weathered many storms before. "Good afternoon," he began, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Thank you all for coming. We're here today to address the incident that occurred 2 days ago involving Captain Dana Wells. As many of you are aware, Captain Wells was mistakenly arrested by one of our officers during a routine patrol. This incident has understandably caused a great deal of concern, both within our community and beyond." He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle over the room before continuing with careful precision. "Let me be unequivocally clear. What transpired is wholly unacceptable. We are deeply committed to ensuring that such an incident never occurs again. In response, we have initiated a thorough, independent investigation into the matter. This investigation will be exhaustive, and we are resolute in our determination to hold those responsible fully accountable for their actions." Dana listened intently to the mayor's statement, her expression carefully neutral. She understood that this was the part where the city's leaders aimed to control the narrative, providing a reassuring facade that everything was under control and that appropriate measures were being taken. However, Dana was acutely aware that mere words would not suffice. The people outside weren't merely calling for an investigation. They were demanding substantial, concrete change, and that was precisely why Dana was here, to push for that change. As the mayor concluded his remarks, Chief Marshal stepped up to the microphone. "I want to echo the mayor's sentiments," Chief Marshal stated, his voice gravelly yet resolute. "Captain Wells is one of our most dedicated and respected officers. The fact that this situation occurred to her is profoundly troubling and underscores the deeper issues within our department that we must confront." Marshall's gaze briefly met Dana's, and she responded with a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of the solidarity he was extending to her at this moment. He continued, "As the investigation unfolds, we will also be rigorously reviewing our current protocols and training programs. It is absolutely critical that our officers are fully equipped with the necessary knowledge and skills to prevent such situations in the future. We owe this to our community and to the men and women who serve with honor." When Marshall concluded, a brief, tense silence enveloped the room. All eyes then turned to Dana. This was her moment. She drew a deep breath, bracing herself, and leaned slightly forward, her gaze methodically sweeping across the room. The camera lights were intensely bright, nearly blinding, but she concentrated on the faces beyond them, the reporters, the officials, and the community leaders who had gathered to hear her perspective. "Thank you," Dana began, her voice steady and composed. "I want to start by emphasizing that what happened to me was not merely a mistake. It is a glaring symptom of a far-reaching issue within our police department and, indeed, within law enforcement as a whole. This incident transcends the error of judgment made by one officer. It reflects the systemic problems that permitted that error to occur in the first place. The room fell into a deep, expectant silence, the tension almost palpable as reporters leaned in, their pens poised and recorders ready. Dana felt the profound weight of her words, the enormity of her responsibility in speaking out, but she pressed forward. Throughout my career, I have been dedicated to tackling these issues: bias, inequality, and the erosion of trust between the police and the communities we serve. I have witnessed firsthand how these problems affect not only the individuals we are sworn to protect, but also the officers striving to perform their duties. And let me be clear, this is not a challenge that can be remedied with superficial fixes or mere public statements. It demands real, substantive change. Dana paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. The independent investigation announced is an important initial step, but it is only that, an initial step. What we need is a comprehensive approach to reform. We need to overhaul our training programs to ensure that every officer is equipped to make sound decisions in the field. We need to institute new protocols that address the biases that too often skew those decisions. And we need to hold ourselves accountable when we fall short. As she spoke, the cameras flashed, capturing every word and gesture. Dana could see the reporters diligently taking notes, their expressions serious and focused. She knew her words would be scrutinized, analyzed, and debated by the public, her colleagues, and those in positions of power. But none of that mattered to her. This was her truth, and it needed to be heard. There are those who would suggest that we should simply move on from this situation, that our focus should shift toward the positives and avoid dwelling on past mistakes. But I can't bring myself to do that. We can't afford to do that. Ignoring the issue doesn't resolve it. It only lets it fester and grow unchecked. If we don't confront this problem directly and with urgency, we are essentially condoning its persistence and allowing it to continue unabated. Dana felt a wave of intense emotion surge within her, yet she managed to maintain a steady and controlled voice. Even as her passion for the necessary change burned brightly within her, she knew she had to remain composed. "I have a profound love for this department," she said, her voice softening with heartfelt sincerity. "I've dedicated a significant part of my life to it because I firmly believe in the crucial work we undertake. I have immense respect for the individuals who stand beside me in this mission, but I also hold a deep conviction that we can and must do better, not just for ourselves but for the communities that depend on us. We owe it to them to protect, to serve, and to treat them with the utmost dignity and respect." Her gaze shifted to the mayor, who was observing her with a carefully guarded expression, and then back to the reporters, whose cameras were capturing every word she spoke for the world beyond the confines of this room. "What I am calling for extends beyond merely initiating an investigation," Dana continued, her tone resolute. "I am demanding a firm commitment, a commitment to genuine reform and to addressing the entrenched issues that have troubled our department for far too long. I am calling for the bravery to confront what is right, even when it is uncomfortable or challenging, because that is the only path to creating the kind of department that our community deserves." The room fell into a hushed silence, punctuated only by the low hum of the air conditioning and the occasional click of a camera shutter. Dana could feel the weight of everyone's gaze upon her, all eyes eager for her next statement. "I'm not here to cast blame or to point fingers," she continued, her voice unwavering. "Instead, I am here to demand accountability. I am here to urge that we seize this challenging and painful moment as a chance to grow, to learn, and to make the essential changes that are urgently required." Dana observed the faces around the table, the mayor, the chief, and other officials. Some displayed signs of support, while others appeared apprehensive, but all seemed to grasp the gravity of her message. She took a deep breath and concluded her statement. "This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. It's about the kind of police department we aspire to be and the legacy we wish to leave behind. We stand at a crossroads with the opportunity to make the right choice. Let's not squander it." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 7 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time." With those final words, Dana leaned back in her chair, her heart racing with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. The room remained quiet for a few more moments as the gravity of her speech sunk in. Then, the reporters began to murmur among themselves, the sounds of scribbling pens and clicking keyboards filling the room. The mayor cleared his throat, evidently eager to steer the conversation back to his control. "Thank you, Captain Wells, for your powerful and compelling words. We appreciate your unwavering dedication to this department and your commitment to fostering positive change. As we move forward, we will collaborate closely with Captain Wells and other community leaders to ensure these issues are addressed and that our department emerges stronger as a result." The reporters quickly raised their hands, eager to ask their questions. However, before the mayor could address them, Chief Marshal leaned forward and spoke into the microphone. "We will take questions shortly, but I want to echo Captain Wells' sentiment. This represents an opportunity for our department to evolve and improve. We recognize the necessity of change, and we are committed to implementing it. We ask for the public's patience and trust as we navigate this process, and we pledge to uphold transparency and accountability throughout." Dana sensed the tension in the room beginning to ease slightly, though the underlying urgency remained palpable. The press conference would continue with reporters probing for further details and seeking deeper insights into the issues at hand. But Dana felt she had conveyed everything she needed to say. She had clearly articulated her position during the press conference, leaving no room for ambiguity as the mayor and the chief began fielding questions from the assembled reporters. Dana leaned back, her thoughts already shifting toward the next steps in a process she knew was just beginning. The press conference was merely a prologue to a much longer and arduous journey, one that demanded not only persistence and determination but, above all, decisive action. When the press conference concluded, Dana rose from her seat and shook hands with both the mayor and the chief, exchanging courteous but somewhat guarded words. Despite their outward calm, she could sense an undercurrent of tension between them. The mayor, in particular, appeared uneasy, his brows furrowed as he considered the potential repercussions of Dana's firm stance in the court of public opinion. Yet, Dana remained undeterred. For her, the paramount concern was ensuring that justice was served, irrespective of the political fallout or public perception. As Dana exited the conference room, a cluster of reporters quickly surrounded her, bombarding her with a flurry of questions. With practiced composure, she declined to respond, stating that everything she needed to say had already been covered on the record. She had no intention of becoming entangled in a media frenzy. Her focus was resolutely on the substantive work that lay ahead. Stepping outside, Dana was met by the sight of the protest, which had swelled even further, now spilling into the streets. The air was charged with the collective voices of people demanding justice, accountability, and change. Dana was deeply moved as she surveyed the diverse crowd, men and women of all ages and backgrounds, united by a shared cause. Her gaze was drawn to a young woman holding a sign that read, "Justice for All." Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, and Dana felt a profound connection, a mutual understanding of their shared commitment to justice. The woman gave a small, encouraging nod, which Dana reciprocated, a silent acknowledgement of their common purpose. As she navigated past the barricades, a few protesters recognized her and greeted her with applause and shouts of support. The reaction was unexpected and touched her deeply. It was a stark contrast to the usual reception she received as a police officer, and it bolstered her spirits. It served as a reminder that despite the challenges, there were individuals who believed in her mission and supported the changes she was championing. Dana approached her car, and as she settled into the driver's seat, the cacophony of the protest gradually faded. She took a moment to inhale deeply, gathering her thoughts and regaining her composure. The day had been grueling, but she knew the road ahead was still long and fraught with challenges. Her phone buzzed with a new message, and she glanced at it to see a text from Emma. "You were incredible today. I'm so proud of you. How about dinner at home tonight?" Dana's lips curved into a genuine smile for the first time in what felt like ages. She quickly replied, "Thank you. I'd love that. See you soon." As she started the car and pulled away from the precinct, a renewed sense of determination settled over her. The path forward was sure to be difficult, filled with numerous obstacles, but she was resolute. Having made her stand, it was now time to translate her words into concrete actions. Her thoughts turned to the proposal she had promised the chief, the critical reforms that needed to be implemented, and the numerous conversations she would need to initiate with the rank and file, the union representatives, and community leaders. It was going to be a formidable battle, but one she was fully prepared to fight. The city streets remained crowded with protesters, their signs and chants echoing the urgency of the moment. Dana felt a blend of pride, determination, and profound responsibility. The public was counting on her and the department to effect real change, and she was determined not to let them down. As she maneuvered her car into the driveway and turned off the engine, Dana Wells remained seated for a moment, allowing the tranquility of the evening to envelop her. The events of the day played through her mind like a relentless film reel, each scene a reminder of the stakes that had been set and the challenges still looming ahead. The weight of her responsibilities pressed heavily on her shoulders, yet she was resolute, prepared to confront the trials with unyielding determination. With a deep breath, she stepped out of the car and made her way up the familiar path to the front door. The day's burdens were still palpable, but they were momentarily softened by the comforting thought of home. The anticipation of a quiet evening with Emma, a soothing dinner, and a much-needed respite provided a flicker of solace. Yet, as she crossed the threshold into the warmth of her house, her mind remained relentless, a maelstrom of plans and strategies continuously brewing. The resolve to address the monumental task before her was only growing stronger. Dana Wells was poised for the challenges that lay ahead. Her commitment extended beyond personal stakes. It was a crusade for justice, aimed at rectifying wrongs and restoring faith in a faltering system. She vowed to persevere until her mission was accomplished, driven by a sense of duty to all those who had been wronged, who had lost faith, and who dared to believe in the possibility of real change. The fire within her would not be extinguished until justice was served. The weeks following the press conference surged with frenetic activity, teeming with tension and relentless progress. Dana found herself at the epicenter of a storm that showed no sign of easing. Each day presented a fresh set of hurdles, from new meetings and confrontations to the relentless pursuit of her objectives. She remained undaunted, fully aware that this was the battle she had prepared for throughout her career, and she was resolute to see it through, regardless of the personal cost. The independent investigation into her wrongful arrest had gained significant momentum, with an external team of auditors meticulously scrutinizing every facet of the incident. Their focus extended beyond the immediate events of that fateful day to the deeper, systemic issues within the department that had facilitated the injustice. Dana engaged in numerous, exhaustive sessions with the investigators, recounting her experiences, offering insights into the department's pervasive culture, and outlining the necessary reforms. Despite the grueling nature of these meetings, Dana was unwavering in her commitment to a thorough investigation. She was determined to ensure that no detail was overlooked. However, Dana understood that an investigation alone would not suffice. The systemic reforms she had long championed were now more crucial than ever. She had devoted countless hours to crafting a comprehensive proposal aimed at addressing the deep-rooted issues that her own ordeal had illuminated. Her proposal encompassed mandatory bias training for all officers, a complete overhaul of arrest protocols, the introduction of community policing initiatives, and the creation of an independent oversight committee to ensure accountability and transparency. Securing approval for her proposal was a daunting task in itself. Dana engaged in numerous, exhaustive negotiations with the department's leadership, the police union, and city officials. Each meeting was a battleground of debate and persuasion, as she fought to advance the changes she deemed essential. The resistance was formidable. Some officers viewed the additional training as an affront to their professionalism, while the union argued vehemently that the proposed reforms would impose undue strain on officers and compromise their effectiveness. The struggle for reform was arduous, but Dana's resolve remained steadfast, driven by an unwavering belief in the necessity of change. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 8 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. We're out there risking our lives every day, one union representative had declared passionately during a particularly heated meeting. Frustration was evident in his voice as he continued. And now you want to burden us with more red tape, more hoops to jump through? This will only make it harder for us to protect the community, not easier. Dana listened intently to the representative's concerns, fully understanding the stress and pressure the officers faced. Despite her empathy, she remained firm in her resolve. This isn't about making your jobs harder, she responded, her voice calm yet resolute. It's about ensuring that when you do your jobs, you're doing them right. It's about making sure that everyone in this city, everyone, feels safe and respected, including our officers. These reforms aren't meant to punish you. They're meant to protect you, to uphold the integrity of our department, and to rebuild trust with the community we serve. The resistance she faced wasn't confined to the union alone. The mayor's office, while publicly supportive of the proposed reforms, was cautious behind closed doors. The mayor and his aides were concerned about the political ramifications, particularly the potential backlash from certain voter segments. These groups, some of whom viewed any criticism of the police as unpatriotic or anti-law enforcement, could be influential in upcoming elections. The optics of this are tricky, the mayor had said during one tense meeting, his tone serious. We need to be careful about how we frame this. We can't afford to alienate our base. Dana felt a surge of frustration at his words. This isn't about optics, she had replied sharply. This is about doing what's right. We can't keep playing politics with people's lives. The community is demanding change, and we have a responsibility to deliver on that. Dana's voice was steady as she continued. I'm not suggesting that these reforms alone will fix everything, but they are a crucial step in the right direction. The issues we're dealing with are systemic and complex, and no single change will resolve them overnight. However, these reforms are about demonstrating our commitment to change, our willingness to confront our flaws, and our dedication to improving how we operate. If we fail to take these steps, we risk further eroding the public's trust. Once trust is lost, regaining it is nearly impossible. The union representative raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical of the proposed measures. So you're saying that these changes will be enough to restore trust? You think that's all it will take? Dana leaned forward, her hands resting firmly on the table. I don't believe these reforms are a cure-all, but they're a start. They show that we're taking accountability seriously and that we're not ignoring the problems, but actively working to address them. It's not about fixing everything at once. It's about making progress and being transparent about our efforts. The room fell into a thoughtful silence as the union representatives exchanged glances. Dana could see the skepticism in their eyes, yet she also sensed a glimmer of reluctant acknowledgement. The discussion was far from over, but there was a potential for understanding. Chief Marshal cleared his throat and spoke up, his tone measured and authoritative. We've heard Dana's points, and I believe we all recognize that changes are necessary. The question now is how we can implement these reforms in a way that minimizes disruption and addresses the concerns of our officers. The union leader nodded slightly, though his expression remained cautious. We're willing to work with you on this, but we need assurances that these changes won't simply add to the already heavy burdens our officers are facing. We need a clear plan for how these reforms will be rolled out and support for our officers during this transition. Dana nodded, feeling a mix of relief and determination. I appreciate your willingness to collaborate, she said. I'm committed to ensuring that we provide the necessary support and resources to help our officers adapt to these changes. We need to work together to make this transition as smooth as possible and to ensure that everyone involved is prepared and supported. The meeting stretched on as both sides delved into the complexities of the implementation plan, diligently working to address the union's concerns. Discussions were intense and intricate, marked by rigorous negotiations and occasional moments of tension. By the end of the session, although consensus was not fully achieved, a tentative agreement had been reached to move forward with the proposed reforms. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a significant step in the right direction. As Dana walked out of the conference room, she felt a cautious optimism beginning to take root. The weight of the day's challenges was still heavy on her shoulders, but she recognized the progress made. It was a small victory, a beginning of sorts, and it provided a glimmer of hope amid the daunting journey ahead. When she arrived home later that evening, Emma was there, waiting for her. Emma's warm smile and comforting presence offered a reprieve from the day's strain. Seeing Dana's tired but resolute expression, Emma approached with gentle concern. "How did it go?" Emma asked, her voice soft yet hopeful. Dana released a long breath, her exhale a mixture of relief and lingering stress. "It went well. We reached an agreement, but there's still a tremendous amount of work ahead. The real challenge begins now, but I'm feeling hopeful." Emma enveloped Dana in a comforting embrace, her touch a soothing balm for the day's trials. "I'm proud of you. You're making a real difference, even if it doesn't always feel like it." Dana leaned into Emma's hug, drawing strength from her partner's unwavering support. "Thank you. I just need to keep pushing forward, one step at a time." The couple settled into the peaceful quiet of their home, finding solace in each other's presence. Dana knew the road ahead would be demanding, fraught with further obstacles and challenges. Yet, with Emma's steadfast support and her own relentless commitment, she felt prepared to face whatever came next. Reflecting on the meeting's outcomes, Dana's voice was steady and resolute as she articulated her thoughts. "The reforms won't solve everything on their own, but they are a necessary first step. We have to begin somewhere, to show the community that we are genuinely committed to enacting change and holding ourselves accountable. If we don't, we'll merely reinforce the belief that we're part of the problem, not the solution." A moment of silence enveloped the room as the union representatives absorbed her words. Dana observed their reactions. Reluctance and deep-seated resistance to change were evident, a reflection of the department's ingrained culture. Yet, alongside this resistance, there was a flicker of understanding, a recognition that action was necessary, even if her approach faced skepticism. The discussion continued with both sides making their cases, negotiating the finer details of the proposal and seeking areas of compromise. The process was lengthy and fraught with moments of frustration, but Dana remained steadfast. She saw this as her opportunity to drive meaningful change and was determined to push through the reforms that were so urgently needed. As the meeting came to a close, Chief Marshal approached Dana and pulled her aside. "You did well in there," he said, his tone a mix of gruffness and approval. "I know it wasn't easy, but you stood your ground." Dana nodded, feeling a blend of relief and exhaustion. "Thank you, Chief. I just hope it's enough." Marshall gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "It's a start, and sometimes that's all we can ask for." Dana left the conference room with a profound sense of accomplishment, tempered by the reality that her work was far from over. The reforms were merely the starting point. The real test lay in their implementation, adherence, and the tangible impact they would ultimately have. The following weeks were an intense whirlwind of activity. Dana immersed herself in the intricacies of rolling out the new training programs, overhauling departmental protocols, and establishing the Independent Oversight Committee. The workload was relentless, but Dana threw herself into the fray with unwavering dedication and tireless energy. The reaction from the rank and file was a mixed bag. Some officers welcomed the changes with open arms, acknowledging the necessity and appreciating Dana's leadership. Others, however, exhibited resistance, grumbling about the added responsibilities, increased scrutiny, and the shift in departmental culture. Understanding the need for grassroots support, Dana made a concerted effort to visit various precincts, engaging directly with officers, fielding their questions, and addressing their concerns. She knew that for the reforms to succeed, she needed the support of those directly impacted by the changes. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 9 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. During one of these visits, Dana found herself in a heated exchange with a group of skeptical officers regarding the new bias training. "This feels like a punishment," one officer declared, his arms defiantly crossed. "It's like we're all being blamed for what happened to you." Dana met his gaze steadily, her tone firm but empathetic. "This isn't about assigning blame. It's about enhancing our performance as officers. Bias, whether it's conscious or unconscious, influences our interactions with the public and our decision-making processes. This training is designed to help us identify and counteract those biases, aiming to make us more effective officers and better public servants." Another officer chimed in, her voice more conciliatory. "I understand that, but some of us feel like we're being singled out, like the department doesn't trust us to do our jobs." Dana scanned the room, locking eyes with each officer. I appreciate that sentiment, but that's not the intention here. This is about fostering trust, both within our department and with the community we serve. It's about ensuring that when we wear this uniform, we reflect the highest standards of our department. And that process starts with us, right here and now. A heavy silence followed as the officers processed her words. Dana could see the mix of uncertainty and openness in their expressions. It was a tough sell, but she was well aware that genuine change seldom comes easily. It demands patience, persistence, and the readiness to engage in tough conversations. As she departed from the precinct that day, Dana was infused with a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was fraught with obstacles and resistance, but she was making incremental progress. That, she knew, was sufficient to sustain her resolve. At home, Emma remained a pillar of strength and support, guiding Dana through the highs and lows of her demanding role. Their evenings together were a refuge from the chaos, filled with conversations about their day, shared meals, movie nights, and cherished moments of tranquility. Emma's presence was a constant reminder of the balance Dana sought to maintain amid the turbulence of her professional life. One evening, after an especially grueling day, Dana returned home to find an unexpected scene that instantly alleviated the weight of her burdens. As she stepped through the front door, she was greeted by a living room transformed into a serene sanctuary. The soft flicker of candles cast a warm, inviting glow over the room, while gentle, soothing music played in the background, enhancing the atmosphere of tranquility. A beautifully set table awaited her, adorned with a delicious and meticulously prepared meal. "What's all this?" Dana asked, her weariness momentarily forgotten as a smile began to spread across her face. The sight of the thoughtful setup was a welcome contrast to the pressures she had been facing. Emma emerged from the kitchen, her face lighting up with a radiant smile. She immediately enveloped Dana in a heartfelt hug, her embrace warm and comforting. "You've been working so hard," Emma said, her voice brimming with affection. "I wanted to do something special for you. You deserve it." Dana's heart swelled with a deep sense of gratitude and love as she looked at Emma, overwhelmed by the gesture. "You're amazing, you know that," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. Emma laughed softly and placed a tender kiss on Dana's lips. "And don't you forget it." The evening was a cherished escape from the relentless pressures of Dana's work. They spent their time together immersed in conversation and laughter, fully savoring each other's company. For those precious hours, Dana allowed herself to disconnect from the looming challenges and simply enjoy the intimacy and peace of the moment. Later, as they nestled on the couch to watch a movie, Dana rested her head on Emma's shoulder, experiencing a profound sense of calm that had eluded her for weeks. "I couldn't do this without you," Dana murmured softly, her voice filled with sincerity. Emma's fingers gently caressed Dana's hair, her tone warm and reassuring. "And you'll never have to. I'm with you every step of the way." With her eyes closed, Dana absorbed the comfort of Emma's words. She understood that the road ahead would be challenging, and that the quest for meaningful change was far from over. Yet, she took solace in knowing that she was not alone. She had steadfast allies and supporters who believed in her mission and the transformative work she was undertaking. With their support, Dana felt prepared to face any challenge that arose. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the reforms Dana had fought so hard to implement began to take root within the department. The new training programs were rolled out, officers started adapting to the revised protocols, and the Independent Oversight Committee began its essential work. Despite ongoing resistance and the persistent challenges, Dana remained steadfast in her commitment. She recognized that true reform was a long and arduous journey, requiring persistence, resilience, and an unyielding dedication to progress, even when the obstacles seemed insurmountable. Reflecting on her journey, from the harrowing moment of her wrongful arrest to the impactful press conference, the intense negotiations, and the gradual implementation of reforms, Dana felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had stood firm for justice, even when it was difficult and silence would have been easier. She had leveraged her position and influence to effect real change. Although Dana knew that the fight for justice would never truly end as long as there were injustices to address, she was prepared for the ongoing battle. She was ready to continue the work she had started, driven by an unwavering resolve to create a better, more just world. With the steadfast support of her loved ones, colleagues, and community, Dana Wells was confident that she could turn that vision into reality. She was, after all, a fighter, a leader, and a relentless advocate for justice. As we wrap up today's exploration of Captain Dana Wells' intense and eye-opening experience, we hope you've gained valuable insights into the complex realities faced by law enforcement officers and the systemic issues that can arise within the force. Dana's story underscores the importance of empathy, thoroughness, and understanding in our interactions with others, especially in high-stress situations. Now, we want to hear from you. What have you learned from this narrative? How do you plan to apply these lessons in your own life? Share your thoughts and insights in the comments below. If you like this video and found it engaging, please leave your comment, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue to bring you compelling content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.